Hello. The story of the chessboard wheat problem is this. And the story goes that a man brought his new invention, the game of chess, to an Indian king. The king was fascinated by the game and asked the inventor what reward he wanted. The man said that he would take 1 grain of wheat for the first square on the chessboard. That would be doubled to 2 for the second, and doubled again to 4 for the third, and then doubled again to 8 for the fourth, and so on. The king laughed at him, saying this was a pretty paltry reward for such a marvellous game. But upon analysis, sorry, I had a cough. I hope that's not a bad sign. But upon analysis, 1 grain on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, 8 on the fourth, 16 on the fifth, 32 on the sixth, 64 on the seventh, 128 on the 8th, 256 on the 9th, 512 on the 10th. Well, you get the idea. By the time you've made it to the 64th square, the number of wheat grains would be 18 quintillion. 18 quintillion is 18 million times 1 trillion. And that's why the governments are afraid of COVID-19. It's not that there are 100 deaths or whatever this last month, or 1,000 deaths. But the problem is there could be 2 deaths or more for every one of those 1,000 victims in the next batch, and so on. We just don't know. And the really frightening thing about this particular type of influenza is that it lays low for so long. People can have it for a couple of weeks, spreading the disease around to dozens of people before they themselves become sick. And often, if they're youngish, they might not even get that sick at all. However, those guys making comments under my videos, oh, by the way, please like, subscribe, share and make comments, even ones like this. Those guys making comments under my videos saying it's all a hoax. Well, come on, it's not a hoax. Governments aren't shutting down their economies for a hoax. Israel's a good case in point. That's one country that certainly can't afford to lose its footing, and yet they now have about I think 25% unemployment because of the lockdown. So why are they doing it? Well, they're all thinking about the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. About 500 million people got that infection and about 50 million people died. That's a lot. It was a dreadful time, and it left a permanent mark on the memory of people, not only the ones who weren't even born at the time, but those whose parents weren't born at the time either. Stories from it are legend. The thing is, though, that more people died of it in the USA, pro rata of the population, than died of it pro rata of the population in Britain. Which is strange because in the USA they did practice some isolation procedures. They shut down cinemas and public meetings, for instance, while in Britain they didn't do any such thing. And still the fatalities for Britain were about 6% of the ones who showed symptoms, as against about 10% of victims in the United States. Well, that leaves us a question about whether isolation actually works, or whether it just sort of appears to work for a while and then jumps ahead when it's released, because there's only so much you can do. And we just don't know. There might have been other factors. It could have been something to do with the weather, for instance. Warmer, damper weather, or cooler, drier weather, or something could have made a difference to its transmittability. It could have to do with the economic differences in the populations. Who knows? And that's the problem. Who knows? Personally, I don't see this pandemic as anything like the 1918-19 one, and that's not because of the deaths, but because the Spanish flu epidemic killed a lot of people in their infancy and in their 20s to their early 40s. So, the death of the children would have had a devastating psychological effect upon a whole generation of parents, even the ones who didn't lose children. And the other victims were the parents and people in their most productive years. So it had a terrible economic impact on the country, on whatever country it was in, simply because its productive population were dying off. Just a minute, I think 9 million people died in the First World War. And then about 50 million died of the flu. Can you imagine the psychological effect that would have had? This epidemic, though, if it rampages through our population in general, it'll kill older people and will probably not, therefore, have a huge effect on the economic health of the countries affected. And we talk about the effects of the economy as if that was something nasty and we shouldn't talk about that. But, we should. People have better lives when there's more money around. Just look at Venezuela, if you want to take an example of what happens to a country when the money runs out. So, in my opinion, so far, well, except for the behaviour of the police, I think what this government is doing is probably about right. That is, it's buying time to come to terms with the situation and put together some sort of a system. It's called a novel virus for a reason, We don't even know how to treat it. And we're not sure, for instance, if, having dealt with all the old people, it will mutate into something that will start to thin out a younger generation. And that's something else the governments are all thinking of with their isolation practices. And we don't even know the long-term effects of the disease. For instance, it's a virus, and other viruses have effects on pregnant women. For instance, we know what the Zika virus did to the children of women who got it while they were pregnant. And we do know that so-called ordinary flu can have a bad effect on the next generation in, well, a similar way, if not one so obviously spectacular as Zika. So the government is facing the choice of destroying people's lives through economic catastrophe or through potentially fatal illnesses. If they want my opinion, I'd say the present situation is okay for another couple of weeks, but it shouldn't persist any longer. I know it's a risk for me and for others, but I want to hand over to my grandchildren a country they can live in, and I certainly wouldn't want them to be paying for the rest of their lives for a few years extension of mine. Well, that's it. If you want to donate or contact, the information will be rolling over the Granniopteryx as I speak. Please like, subscribe and share because it does help with the algorithm. If you visit my channel on YouTube and one day discover that I've disappeared without warning, you'll still find me on Bitchute or Minds. Just go to either of those platforms and do a search for Granniopteryx. If you're already watching this on Bitchute or Minds, good for you. Meanwhile, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember that you must keep checking the subscribe and bell icons because occasionally they reset. Till next time.